I actually had my own mental health breakdown. I was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And so that was a major moment for me. I had to reconstruct myself, reconstruct my identity. I'm eternally grateful for my doctors, my psychologists, my psychiatrists, and for friends who have opened up to me about their own mental health struggle. For me, it was bipolar. For other people, it's anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, all kinds of things. There shouldn't be shame around it. We don't shame people if they break their leg or have a physical issue. But for some reason, there's still resistance to understanding mental health and the need for mental health support in this country.
Welcome to the Speak Up Against Stigma podcast. I am your host, Kristy Towson, and I'm really excited to talk to our guest today. We're going to be talking all things mental health as usual, so please stay tuned and pull up a chair because we're about to dive right on in. Welcome. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you, Christy, for the invitation.
Why do you speak up against mental health stigma?
Mental health is super important. I feel that more recently, people are becoming more aware of the importance of mental health. People are finally sharing their struggles and sharing what they've been through. I also think that families have become a little bit more open to the idea of therapy, medication when needed, etc. And for personal reasons, I've always found therapy helpful in terms of navigating different personal things. However, it was during the pandemic. At the height of the pandemic, I actually had my own mental health breakdown. I was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And so that was a major moment for me. I had to reconstruct myself, reconstruct my identity. I'm eternally grateful for my doctors, my psychologists, my psychiatrists, and for friends who have opened up to me about their own mental health struggle. For me, it was bipolar. For other people, it's anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, all kinds of things. And there's levels of it. People go through different degrees of struggle, I would say. That's why I'm passionate about it. There shouldn't be shame around it. We don't shame people if they break their leg or have a physical issue. But for some reason, there's still resistance to understanding mental health and the need for mental health support in this country.
How was it for you when you got your diagnosis of being bipolar?
It was a tough journey. So it really felt like it came out of nowhere. I really didn't have any signs per se. And the doctors actually shared with me, they're like, yeah, people usually get diagnosed by the time they're in their mid to late 20s. I was already close to 40 when I was diagnosed. I was behaving very strangely, and my parents, out of concern for me, ended up calling the police. When someone's in crisis, there really is nowhere else to call except 911, right? And so that activates police, ambulance, etc., all those things. In other words, I wish there was a better way. I think now there's starting to be talks about other options, but in the moment, that's what ended up happening. Unfortunately, the first hospital that I was admitted to, they were not helpful. They didn't diagnose me. They just basically attributed it to stress, and they essentially sent me home to go meet with my therapist. That was it, even though it was a very significant breakdown. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I had an even worse manic episode. I live in Los Angeles. I hopped on a plane and went to San Francisco, where I went to grad school. I was wandering the streets of San Francisco alone for a couple days. It's wild to even articulate that and to know that, yeah, that happened. Thankfully, there was this moment of clarity that I was like, I need help and I need to call my mom. That's literally how it happened. At that point, I had actually lost my luggage. I had lost my purse. I was literally walking around just with a shirt on my back, pretty much. And I was like looking for a phone. There's not even payphones anymore. I made it back to my old neighborhood. I walked into a T-Mobile and they're like, yeah, you can use our phone. Sure. And of course, my mom screams like, Lord, God bless her. Unbeknownst to me, my family and friends had already been looking for me. They were in communication. One of my best friends lives just a few blocks from that T-Mobile. It's our old neighborhood. She happens to be a psychiatric nurse. So I couldn't take a better angel to come through for me. She literally ran to the store and picked me up. took me to her house. A couple other of my friends were there. And, they gave me a little time. They're like, "Are you hungry?" They're like, "Lauren, we think you need to go to the hospital." And I was like, "Yeah, I think so." Thank God for doctors and psychiatrists. I went to UCSF. I was admitted in their psychiatric center for at least 7 days, maybe 7 to 10 days. I can't remember exactly. But they were the ones that actually helped me. They diagnosed me and they helped put me on a plan to recover. It's been a long process. In summer 2020, I felt very broken, a failure in every sense of the word, professor and author. My entire world has to do with my thinking, right? My thinking, my teaching, my writing. And for me to not have mental clarity or to not be able to express myself, it was beyond a crisis. It was like so devastating. And I'm so grateful that little by little, and I have to also give myself credit of putting in the work. I was very committed to things like my therapy sessions, journaling, doing art practice, meditation, reading books that were inspiring, like basically anything to try to revive myself, essentially. It really does feel like a miracle that today, like I've been teaching, I'm working on my book, I launched a podcast a year ago. Like it's in God, but that whole experience, there's no denying that was a miracle that I survived. So yeah, I think it got a little bit personal in details, but that's why I'm so passionate about this because it was quite the journey. Yeah.
Listen, I get it. You talked about believing in God and that whole experience and how eye-opening it was for you. About 8 years ago, I was depressed and suicidal.
Mm.
I was so suicidal that I burned my house down with me in it because I was just ready to die. I did not die that day, thank God, but I was arrested and I spent
Mm.
30 days in jail. And that probably was one of the best things that could have happened to me back then.
Wow.
A guard had offered me a pen and paper, and I began to write
Oh,
and pour out emotions and feelings that I had trapped in me for so long. And
yeah.
it was so freeing, it's so liberating that I decided to start an anthology with other women who have similar stories like you and I, so that
Okay.
we can bring down the barrier to making mental health more accessible with
Mm.
our communities and also
Wow.
so that people can feel less alone.
Yeah.
I know when I was going through what I was going through, I felt completely isolated from the
Mhm.
world, be able to identify with what I was feeling or what was happening to me.
Right.
I kept all of that to myself because of the
Mhm.
stigma. What will people think about me? And then what was I thinking about myself? Because there's also that thing of self stigma, that internal stigma that we often face. So I get it when you say like believing in God and trusting in God.
Oh,
I was there, sister.
amazing. Thank you so much, Chrissy. Wow. Thank you for sharing. That's very much a testimony. And I think it's hard sometimes for us to wrap our mind around, but it's true. I think sometimes we really are pushed to the edge, and those moments force us to reevaluate and start believing a different way. Those are very hard moments for sure. Thank you so much for sharing. That's very powerful.
I wanted to ask you about your diagnosis when you
Mm.
received it. I know initially it was difficult to receive, but you also said that you put in the work to heal and to recover. Now that you've done the work and you're in a better place, how would you say having that diagnosis has impacted you?
It's impacted me, dare I say, in a positive way, because there are things about myself or about how I handle life that make more sense now. The doctors shared with me, they're like, yeah, actually, a lot of people in academia have bipolar. There's something about it that's very attractive. The high highs, the stress, and I was like, really? That's interesting. They're like, also hyper religiosity. I was like, PhD in theology. That makes sense, right? All these little bits and pieces. I was like, okay, now a lot of this makes sense. And it also has allowed me to be a little bit kinder to myself. I feel like for a long time, I was burning the candle on both ends and very harsh on myself and feeling like I'm not doing enough, push through, do this, do that. And it's like, no, you really can't. You're really going to regret that if you don't take time for yourself, if you don't breathe, if you don't meditate. Learning to say no has been huge. I am a former people pleaser. Learning to say no, learning to set boundaries. These are a lot of the topics that we hear in passing in social media, of course, right? We hear people giving advice, things like that. It's true. A lot of that is very valid and helpful. It has opened my eyes to a lot. Grateful for the journey. I definitely see a pattern. As hard as it is, I do believe God has allowed certain things to happen to me so that I could understand, so that I literally could speak on it, so that I could literally share my story and share what's happened and things like that. Part of the journey, being able to have compassion for others, to really understand what other people go through. Because if a person is so far removed and has never had an encounter or experience with any of these topics or issues, it's really easy to judge. It's really easy to judge, like, oh, what's wrong with them? Or, oh, why would they do that? Or, oh, that was dumb. It's like, no, to be able to understand where people are coming is a gift. So in reflection, I am grateful for the things that have happened, for sure.
I can relate to that so much. I often say that depression was the best thing that ever happened to me because through going through what I had to experience, so much more compassionate towards other people.
Yeah,
Know what it's like to be at my lowest, and I had wished that someone had just seen me for who I was or just someone who was struggling,
yeah,
and I didn't get that. And so when you're on the other side of it, it's easier to have compassion towards other people when you've hit rock bottom, essentially.
totally,
So I
totally.
get that. There's something humane about that. Really makes it just very eye-opening,
Yeah.
you said like you're in LA, I'm in Maryland. And in Maryland, we have what's called an emergency petition. An emergency petition is if someone is in danger of hurting themselves or someone else. You have to go to the court, you have to file it, you have to then call the police
Mm,
so that the police can, assess the situation and see
mm,
if the
hmm.
person is indeed harmful. If they are, they will take them to the nearest hospital, not
Mm.
psychiatric hospital, but the nearest hospital
Hospital. Mm.
that may or may not be able to service their needs from a
Right.
psychiatric standpoint. I have a family member who has gone through that system so many different times. The police, as great as they are not trained for mental health
No,
situations,
no,
and they should not be first line responders when it comes to navigating mental health. I
exactly.
have a big problem with that because when my mom didn't know what else to do, she called the police as well
Hmm.
in my episodes because she was afraid that I was going to hurt myself.
Right.
And the next thing that I knew, I was in handcuffs in the back of a paddy wagon taken to the hospital. And
Exactly.
when I got to the hospital, I was just in awe of what had just transpired.
That's traumatic in and of itself. Absolutely. I had a similar experience.
Yeah, I believe that we're more alike than we are different. So it's no
Hmm.
coincidence that we're having this conversation today. But, just the police in general, I think that they need more training. There needs to be a different task
A different
force
system.
that goes out to support those that have challenges. I too am bipolar. And I was diagnosed after I had an episode. I had to go to a psychiatric hospital to get the
Hmm.
diagnosis. Bipolar, depression, anxiety, even borderline personality disorder, which I also have been diagnosed with, they all look alike. And it's very hard to determine what someone is going through without someone being skilled in that area. But when I first got my diagnosis, I cried. because
Mm,
I felt broken. I felt like, what is wrong with me? And
yeah.
why can't I get this together?
Mhm.
But on the other side of it, I felt empowered because now I have this knowledge and I
Mhm.
can take this knowledge and be a better person because of it. So
Mhm.
many different things began to make sense. Why I never fit in with other people.
Yep.
I began to embrace my social anxiety, for an example, as
Mm.
part of my personality. I'm more of an introvert and a person that likes to do things alone in
Mm.
solitude. All of that makes sense. I was even diagnosed with being on the spectrum last year, and that was eye-opening in itself, because it's like, like
Yeah.
the masking, you talk about
Yeah.
people pleasing, the masking of trying to create what you think other people want out of
Totally.
you. That is exhausting. And applaud you for sharing your story with me today,
Thank you.
being so open and transparent. I really appreciate it. What's maybe one lesson that you learned throughout your journey that you could help someone else with?
I would say don't give up on yourself. The process can be very slow and very frustrating. This is me sharing 5 years later, right? Like, the height of it was summer 2020, and we're now summer 2025. So, if someone had asked me 3 years ago, I might have had a little bit of a different, perspective. But 5 years later, I see things differently. I'm actually pretty grateful for what happened because I think it did create a bigger sense of compassion within me. Biggest advice for people is to have patience with yourself and do the work. Don't give up on yourself. Each of us has different things going on. There's different types of neurodivergence, and sometimes these different things are revealed little by little. You may learn more things about yourself as the years go on. It's okay. The pieces will start to fit. For example, like, I have friends that were diagnosed with like ADD, ADHD way late in their 40s or 50s. And it's kind of comforting in a way. Like, the pieces start to fit, things start to make sense. No wonder I didn't like to do crazy concerts. No wonder I didn't like to go over here. No wonder I was kind of this way or particular about certain things. It all starts to click. And so that's my biggest advice, really. Trust in yourself, keep going. Sometimes it's hour by hour. Like, I'm gonna be okay till lunch, and I'm gonna be okay till dinner, and I'm gonna, get myself to bed. Sometimes it's really tiny steps, and that's okay. Other times it's like, okay, I'm gonna do my best this week. Move forward. It's just like those incremental steps. And being kind, it's a combination of don't give up on yourself, be kind to yourself, and trust. For me, I say trust in God, trust in the universe, trust in yourself and your intuition is my advice.
That's awesome. Tell me about this book you're writing.
Beep. Oh my gosh. So I laugh because traditionally, people write their first book shortly after graduation or during their first teaching job as a professor. For many reasons, which are too long to name, I have not done that. My road it has been a little different. More recently, I would say in the last year or two, the signs from God, I'm into tarot reading. I love all things religion and spirituality. So I pray in a very Catholic way. I go to mass. My specialization is pneumatology or the Holy Spirit. So really, I want to talk about the connection between faith and culture and what both disciplines can learn from one another. Now I understand why my road has been the way it's been. Why I studied theology for so long. Most recently, I teach at UCLA in the Chicano and Central American Studies department. Totally different, right? It's not a religion department, it's not a theology department. And yet I have learned so much, not only as a scholar, but I feel that I've learned so much from my students and they've learned from me. They're like, wow, you really opened our eyes about spirituality, religion, how important it is. It's been really beautiful to work with those students. For them to have a Latina professor, some of my students are Guatemalan, and they're like, oh my God, it's so cool to have a Guatemalan American or Ecuadorian American professor in class, especially right now with everything going on. It's been hard as far as immigration and culture and things like that. But I'm grateful. I definitely learned a lot. I'm excited to write. I'm slowly making progress on the book. Hopefully by the end of the year.
Oh, nice. That was the next question. Like, what's your goal to complete?
I've come to the conclusion that my soul will not rest until this book is done. I can't even begin to name all the little reminders and signs that have come up. It's really cool.
Really exciting. Tell us about your podcast.
Yes. So my podcast is called the Gold Hoops and God Podcast. There are new episodes every Wednesday. And I'm already on season 4, which I'm very excited about. A year ago, I started the podcast. Basically, it's very conversational. I talk to different Latinas about their understanding of culture and faith. Some of my colleagues and friends come from different backgrounds, like Dominican, Cuban, Argentinian, Mexican American. Some of them grew up in the US, some of them came as, young children, some came later on, as grown adults, etc. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating to think about Latina culture in general. And then we talk about faith. Again, some of them are Catholic, Christian, some are more into like tarot, curanderismo, some are not really practicing any particular religion. And again, it's really fun to hear the diversity of thought, the diversity of experience. And then I always ask my guests at the end about their inner child, their inner niña, because I think that many of us had to grow up very fast. A lot of us had to grow up with a lot of responsibility. I didn't really get to have a lighthearted childhood, especially as an eldest daughter that shapes the way they see the world. The responses to that have been so beautiful. All of the women who have shared talk about how they wish they had, not worried so much, had trusted themselves more, had been more bold. It's very insightful. Had they been more playful or creative and not held back so much. It's been really fantastic. I've learned so much about the folks that I've interviewed thus far too. So it's been great.
Hey, and where can people find you?
The audio of the podcast is available everywhere you stream podcasts. So that includes Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeart, etc. And then I actually upload the videos so you can watch the interview on YouTube.
Wonderful. Any last words that you'd like to share with the listeners today?
There is so much going on in the world. I think more than anything is to try to be kind to one another, to try to tap into that compassion for other human beings. You have no idea what people are going through personally, what their families might be facing. I think just a little bit more kindness would go a really long way right now. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and showing up today on the Speak Up Against Stigma podcast.
Thank you. This is fabulous. Thank you, Kristy. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye bye.